In this episode, the crew of Deep Space Nine discovers an abandoned infant left behind in the wreckage of a ship. Just think of the tragic circumstances that led up to that. When I try to imagine it, I see a woman in the night with a baby in her hand, under an old street light, near a garbage can. It doesn't really work. I was stretching for the Neil Young reference, and it doesn't really work. And I'm strong enough to admit that. This is a review of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, The Abandoned. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know why Odo has a climbing dome from an elementary school playground in his room, be warned. Spoilers beyond this point. Stories about people finding abandoned babies who turn out to be from their sworn enemies always have happy endings, right? Right! We open in Quark's, where Quark himself is watching nervously from the upper level while this guy wins a fortune at the Dabo wheel, and hey, he's the same species as the guy from the last episode I reviewed. The people with saucers glued to their foreheads. I guess they all really like playing Dabo or something. Or maybe it's a coincidence. 2 people isn't really a representative sample. Anyway, this guy is about to walk away with his winnings when the Dabo girl, Marta, flirts with him and convinces him to let it ride for one more spin of the wheel. So he does, and he loses, which only goes to confirm my long-held belief that gambling is for dum-dums. Saucerhead makes a pass at Marta, but it doesn't work because, hey, do you want to have a drink with a gullible Mark who just lost a bunch of money isn't the strongest pickup line. Instead, Marta walks over to a table and sits down with Jake, who she is dating. She says, "I can't wait to have dinner with you and your father tomorrow night." And Jake's like, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba? Did your father not tell you that he invited me to dinner at your place tomorrow? It's not a problem, is it? Psh, no, it's not a huge problem for me at all. That my dad did that. It's fine. Everything's fine. Come to dinner. It'll all be fine. Elsewhere in the bar, Quark agrees to buy some salvage from this lady who throws in some implied sex to seal the deal. And we cut to Quark in the cargo bay surveying his salvage, which looks like someone just backed a garbage truck up and dumped it out. But Quark is pleased with his purchase due to the implied sex he got in exchange. Until, that is, he hears crying coming from inside this waffle iron. He opens it up, and inside is a baby, which I assume will taste delicious with some butter and maple syrup. Unless it hasn't been cooked enough. Nobody likes a runny waffle. Or a runny baby. Quark takes the baby to the infirmary, and as Dr. Bashir is examining it, Commander Sisko walks in like, "Quark, you bought a baby? How many times am I going to have to ask you to stop doing that? Just for that, I'm confiscating your cargo bay full of junk." "Not my junk!" "And we're taking custody of the baby. You've got a deal." Bashir tells Sisko that the baby's metabolism and rate of growth are faster than anything he's ever seen outside of a laboratory. But Sisko isn't listening because he's a dad and he's holding the baby, and look at the baby. Dax walks up like, "I'll contact the orphanages on Bajor to let them know we might be sending them a new guest." "Oh, good idea. Let's turn him over to an orphanage on the planet that's still recovering from decades of brutal colonialism and genocide, instead of allowing him to grow up in the limitless prosperity of our utopian paradise in the Federation." "Cool, I'll get right on it." Sisko and Dax leave the infirmary, and as they're walking through the promenade, Sisko laments how much he misses Jake being a small child. "There are times when I'd give almost anything to go back to the days when I could make Jake happy just by lifting him over my head." "Yeah. And also Captain Picard hadn't killed your wife yet." "Yeah. Well, it's not as if Jake hates you nowadays." "True. In fact, since I'm so full of friendly fatherly feelings, I'm gonna go straight home and give Jake a hug." So Sisko goes home and goes up to Jake and says, "Give your old man a hug." And Jake turns away like, "No, I hate you." "What did I do?" "You invited my girlfriend over for dinner without telling me. I told you a few weeks ago that if you didn't invite her over, I would invite her myself. So you see, this is really all your fault. But if it's that much of a problem, I can call her and cancel." "It's not a problem. It's not a massive, all-consuming problem that's been on my mind every second since I found out. It's good. It's fine. I'm fine." "Great." Sisko heads back to the infirmary where Bashir has an update on the baby. He ain't no baby. The kid's had a bit of a growth spurt, and he is now the equivalent of like a 9-year-old human. Bashir is still puzzled by his rapid growth and suspects the child is the product of some pretty advanced genetic engineering. This suspicion is bolstered when the child just up and starts talking. The child doesn't have a name and doesn't know about specific things like, for example, space stations, but he can communicate his needs and desires. He's hungry and he wants to learn. Bashir speculates that his genetic engineering must have included a certain level of basic intelligence loaded into his brain because he's rapidly developing verbal skills without anyone ever teaching him. Dropping by the cargo bays, Sisko says to O'Brien, "Are you finished examining Quark's junk?" And O'Brien says, "Not yet. We're giving every inch of Quark's junk a thorough going over. But we have found a few things. This waffle iron where the baby was found was keeping him in a state of suspended animation, almost as if the people transporting him didn't want him to start maturing until they reached their destination." Sisko is like, "Good work. Oh, by the way, can you fix the replicator in my quarters? I'm having Jake's girlfriend over for dinner tonight, and I'm going to break them up because she's an older woman and a Dobho girl." I think you mean Dabo? Isn't that what I said? Anyway, I do not approve, and I figure the best way to handle the situation is to humiliate them at dinner in front of each other. "You do you, boss. I'll send someone in to fix the replicator for you." "Thanks, Chief. In the meantime, keep exploring Quark's junk." Kira drops by Odo's new quarters. Odo finally got quarters instead of just sleeping in a bucket in the back of his office. Good for him. And she's brought a housewarming gift, a mostly dead plant. Odo's like, "Oh, hey, great, thanks." Kira hints around that she wants to see Odo's new place, so he reluctantly lets her in and shows her around. He's furnished the place with a bunch of sculptures and other exotic-looking objects, including a big playground climbing dome that I would totally have in my house if I had the space. He tells Kira that he wants to practice taking the shapes of these different objects to experience what it really means to be a shapeshifter. Kira's like, "That's awesome, dude. Good for you. Where are you going to put the small burden I have gifted to you?" And Odo says, "I have an idea." And he pulls out his bucket. Quark's been sneaking in while I'm at work and using it for a toilet, but now I can use it for a planter. I'm sure that will discourage him. Meanwhile, Bashir is sharing a meal and chatting with Dax when he gets an urgent summons to the infirmary. The orphan from the waffle maker is still growing, and he's ready to leave, thanks. He escapes the infirmary and runs loose on the promenade, knocking people over along the way until Odo shows up and stops him in his tracks. We get our first good look at the more mature Waffle Iron Kid and realize what species he belongs to. He's a Jem'Hadar. Naturally, as soon as they hear about this, Starfleet orders Sisko to send the Waffle Iron Kid to a starbase so they can interview him and study him and maybe some light vivisection, who knows. Bashir objects on humanitarian grounds, and so does Odo, who tells Sisko, "I know what it's like to be treated like a laboratory specimen. Don't turn this kid over to Starfleet yet. Give me a chance to talk to him, to reach him, to see if he can be more than the killing machine the Founders made him to be. I'm a changeling. He's genetically programmed to listen to me. I know I can control him." Sisko agrees to buy Odo some time with Starfleet, and Odo goes to security where the Waffle Iron Kid is being held in a cell. He feels sick, which Bashir says is because his body lacks a necessary enzyme, and without it, he's experiencing symptoms analogous to a drug addict going through withdrawal. He needs to run some more tests, but the kid isn't cooperating. So Odo says to the kid, "Cooperate." And the kid's like, "Okay." Odo's like, "This is gonna be so easy." It's time for the big dinner at the Sisko place. Ben serves up some delicious-looking shrimp creole, and he's all set to start the compulsory breakup process when he makes the rookie mistake of asking Marta about herself. So she tells him that her parents were killed during the occupation, she's been on her own since she was 13, she has a sister and a brother, but they don't speak because her siblings don't approve of her working as a Dabo girl. Isn't it sad how judgmental people are about Dabo girls? It's so nice to be sharing a meal in an enlightened Federation household where no one could possibly harbor such small-minded opinions. Shit. Jake says, Marta's not just a Dabo girl, she's also a writer, and a good one. Marta's like, "Come on, I'm not that good." But Jake's like, "Yes, you are. In my opinion, as a 16-year-old who wants to have sex with you, your writing is amazing." Marta counters that her writing isn't as good as the poetry Jake writes, and Sisko's like, "You write poetry?" Marta says, yeah, and he plays Domjot. And Sisko's like, you play Domjot? Marta says, yeah, and he plays Dabo too, but he's not nearly as good at that. He actually owes Quark a lot of money, and if he doesn't pay up soon, I'm supposed to drop the pretense of being his girlfriend and cut off one of his fingers. And Sisko's like, you play Dabo? Meanwhile, O'Brien has discovered something under Quark's junk, and he wants to show it to Odo. It's a drug dispenser, and it might be the drug that the Waffle Iron Kid is jonesing for. O'Brien's like, creating a child that will be born addicted to a chemical. I don't understand it. How did the mother of this child allow him to end up here? And Odo's like, well, maybe she put the kid away and she's gone to get a hit of Ketracel White. Nailed it. It works after all. I feel vindicated. Okay, they don't know it's called Ketracel White yet, but close enough. You can stretch a little too, you know. So I can put Neil Young jokes in my Star Trek reviews. Once the kid gets his fix, he's ready for action. He invites himself over to Odo's place, and while there, Odo takes the opportunity to try and break through some of the genetically implanted Jem'Hadar conditioning. The kid asks why Odo wants to look like a humanoid when he's a changeling and is therefore superior to them. Odo says, I'm not superior to them, or to you, or to anyone. Everyone is equal. The kid's like, that sounds like liberal horseshit, but the fascists who created me programmed me to always defer to changelings like you, so I'm not really sure what to do here. Odo says, what do you want to do? And the kid says, I want to learn about my people. So, Odo shows him a security video of some Jem'Hadar soldiers fighting the Starfleet crew on the Defiant. Odo says, as you can see, your people are brutal warriors, but that doesn't mean you have to be like that. Together we can find healthier ways for you to channel your instinctive feelings of aggression. They go to the holosuite, and Odo says, computer, run program Odo 1, and this alien dude appears. And Odo says, here, you can fight with this guy until you tire yourself out, but remember, you can only fight holograms. No fighting the real people outside this room, okay? While the kid is having fun fighting the holographic alien, Kira walks in. Odo's like, hey, you can't just walk in on someone's holosuite program. Good thing I was running Odo 1 and not Odo number 2. Kira pulls Odo outside and says, hey, maybe encouraging the genetically engineered murder machine to indulge his murder urge isn't the best idea. Also, he moved in with you? Surely you realize that he only listens to you because he was programmed that way. You'll only be able to stop him from going full Jem'Hadar for so long. He was designed to kill, and sooner or later holograms aren't going to be enough, and that's what he's going to do. Odo says, I was supposed to be a founder. You used to be a terrorist. We've chosen to move beyond our old programming, so why shouldn't he get the same chance? It's easy for you to say that. You are the only person on this station he won't kill. Odo gets called to Sisko's office, and Sisko informs him that Starfleet is tired of waiting, so they're sending a ship to pick up the Waffle Iron Kid and take him to a starbase. Odo is pissed, and so is the kid, who reveals that he's been hiding in the office this whole time using that personal cloak gimmick that Jem'Hadar can do. He pulls a gun on Sisko and says, I'm not going on any starship. I'm leaving and I'm taking Odo with me. Now give me a runabout. A runabout is a kind of starship. Shut up! You know what I mean! Odo convinces Sisko to let them go, and on their way to the runabout, Odo tries to persuade the kid to choose the third option. Don't go with Starfleet. Don't go to join the rest of the Jem'Hadar, which is what the kid wants. Take the runabout to another planet, somewhere in unexplored space, where the two of them can live and the kid can become who he wants to be, not who he was programmed to be. But the kid says, who I was programmed to be is who I want to be. And I don't know what the other changelings are like, but I know they aren't like you. You don't belong here any more than I do, but these people have changed you, filled your mind with silly, false ideas and beliefs. It's pathetic. And I know because the infallible god beings who created me wrote that in my brain. Sisko and some security goons block their way to the runabout, but Odo tells Sisko to let them go. I'll drop him off in Dominion territory, then come back, Odo says. It's the only safe option. Sisko reluctantly agrees, and Odo and the Waffle Iron Kid leave to board the runabout. Later, once everything has settled down, Sisko is talking station business with O'Brien, and they see Jake and Marta walking down the promenade together. O'Brien's like, "I thought you were going to break them up." And Sisko says, "I was, but then I got to know her a little better, which led to me getting to know Jake a little better, which led to me playing Domjot with Jake and losing, so much money. Well, at least he'll be able to pay off Quark now." Kira's sitting at a table, and Odo walks up and says, "So, about the Waffle Iron Kid just being a killing machine who will never be able to transcend his programming. You were right. I'm sorry. I know. It's just that I was so certain I could..." No, I meant, "I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. Could you repeat that?" The kid wasn't able to overcome his, No. After that, you were right. I'm sorry? The end! Oh boy, what a heartwarming episode, huh? Just so optimistic and life-affirming and... yeah. I like this episode. Well, better to say I liked parts of this episode very much, and I admire the way the writers of this episode chose to structure it, which is atypical in some ways, but I'm not sure it all hangs together the way it should. The good outweighs the bad, but there are certain flaws. Before I get to the flaws, though, let me talk about the good parts. I really like the Sisko, Jake, Marta plot. Yes, it's basic. Yes, it's sitcom-y, especially the dinner scene. Yes, it's fairly predictable, but it gives Ben Sisko the sort of character arc that lead protagonists in Star Trek shows almost never get. The main character is usually in the right, morally speaking, from the beginning of the story, and their arc throughout the episode involves things other than them being compelled to reevaluate their moral position on something. But in The Abandoned, Sisko starts out in the wrong. He doesn't like Marta. He doesn't approve of Jake's relationship with her, and he is determined to break them up. That, he believes, is his proper course of action as Jake's father. And granted, some of Sisko's concerns seem at least reasonable. Jake is only 16 and Marta is 20. A 4-year age gap at those ages would at least warrant some scrutiny from most parents. But it goes beyond that. Ben seems to disapprove of Marta not just because of her age, but because she's a Dabo girl, which he regards as a disreputable job. He has passed judgment on Marta, and as the episode goes on, we are shown that his judgment is unfair. Throughout the course of that dinner scene, Ben realizes this as well, and he adopts a friendlier and more welcoming attitude toward Marta, and he changes his mind. I've talked a lot in other videos about how well-rounded Sisko is. He's one of the very few Star Trek series regulars who has a family who we also regularly see. He's a dad, and he's a good dad. He loves Jake. He's concerned about Jake as Jake continues to grow up, but he also trusts Jake and respects Jake. And when he gets to know Marta a little and realizes that she seems like a good person, he backs off of his intention to break them up because he knows Jake and Marta can take care of their own business, which you know they will. Did you see the way they're always exchanging glances and touching up on each other? That business will most definitely be taken care of. Over in the Odo Waffle Iron Kid plot, there are parenting problems of a different kind. Odo has basically adopted a teenager from an abusive background who is acting out as a result of his profoundly problematic upbringing, and it is a challenge. If we read this plot as a metaphor for trying to raise a troubled child, it's pretty pessimistic. It turns out there's no way to help the kid other than allowing him to return to the abusive cult he was inadvertently rescued from. There's also the bleak, some people are just bad message, which is explained away as the product of genetic engineering in the episode, so it somewhat avoids the uncomfortable racial essentialism that has been a part of Star Trek from the beginning, but only somewhat. All Jem'Hadar are alike because their creators made them that way on purpose doesn't sound as bad as all Jem'Hadar are alike, period, but it still doesn't sound great. Especially when you encounter it in the context of a story like this one, where the tension comes from whether or not the Jem'Hadar in question is capable of being something else. But, hey, this is still the section where I talk about the good parts. Odo is great here. His connection with the kid is established on multiple fronts, and it makes perfect sense and feels fully organic. Odo feels guilty about the harm his people, the founders, have caused, and wants to try and make up for it in some small way. And he relates to the kid on a personal level, because he was discovered by aliens and subjected to tests at the hands of people who didn't recognize him as a sentient being with rights that should be respected, and he fears the same fate waits for the kid if he's turned over to Starfleet. These are basic, human, easy-to-understand motivations. They inform Odo's choices in the episode, and, like Sisko's fatherhood, they round out his character, show us a side to Odo other than the strict, order-obsessed cop. Odo isn't one-dimensional. There are things he cares about, people he cares about, optimistic goals he's willing to take risks in order to pursue. He often comes across as a very cynical, pragmatic character, but through stories like this one, we see that in the right circumstance, he's also capable of hope and a naive, almost childlike optimism. We know things with this Jem'Hadar kid aren't destined to work out, and Odo probably knows that too, but he still believes enough in the kid's potential to try and to not give up until there's absolutely no other choice. For his part, the kid, who is never given a proper name, hence my calling him the Waffle Iron Kid, comes across as more than a robot operating according to his programming. Yes, he eventually succumbs to that programming and leaves to join his fellow Jem'Hadar in doing Jem'Hadar things, but he shows just enough confusion, curiosity, and inner conflict to suggest that maybe there's another side to him in there somewhere. It just can't overcome the conditioning enough to make it out. The way the episode is structured fascinates me because I admire it, but I also think it's perhaps the episode's biggest flaw. The way things start off, this feels like it's going to be a Sisko episode. Sisko imprints on the kid pretty much immediately, holding him in the infirmary, exuding big-time dad energy, speaking wistfully to Dax about Jake when he was that age. But then Sisko veers off into the story with Jake and Marta, and Odo takes over the story with the Jem'Hadar kid, which is fine, except we're like 2 commercial breaks in before we even see Odo. And Odo doesn't meet the Waffle Iron Kid until right before the 3rd commercial break. From that point on, it becomes an Odo episode with a Sisko-Jake subplot, but the road getting there is pretty uneven. At times, that early section of the episode feels like it was written to include as many different characters as possible. Quark finds the baby, who hands him off to Bashir, who hands him off to Sisko, who eventually hands him off to Odo. I'm all for using the regular cast, but it seems like maybe there was a more elegant and efficient way to get to the point of Odo taking responsibility for the kid, you know? The episode, written by D. Thomas Mayo and Steve Warnock, and directed by Avery Brooks himself, becomes very efficient once Odo and the kid are finally joined up. Their relationship is developed very quickly through relatively little screen time, and it works and doesn't feel rushed at all. A lot of the credit for that belongs to Rhea Bergenois, who is excellent as always as Odo, and Bumper Robinson, who plays the kid for most of the episode. Incidentally, if the name Bumper Robinson sounds familiar to you, that might be because he also played Zamis in the film Enemy Mine. He has a type. Nevertheless, I do wish they'd found a way to bring Odo in earlier so that the handoff of the kid from Sisko to Odo didn't feel so abrupt, and there wasn't that sense of, okay, this is an Odo episode now. And yet, having said all that, there are things about this odd episode structure that I really like. I really like how Sisko's parental reaction to the baby is used to set up his story with Jake. I love the subtle but satisfying closure we get when Sisko confronts the kid at the airlock near the end. Sisko walks away and the kid hisses to Odo, "He was afraid of me. He's not my friend, he's my enemy," not knowing that just a few days before, Sisko was holding him in his arms and gazing upon him with a father's love. I like the way there's no urgent external threat to deal with. There's the potential threat of having this Jem'Hadar on the station, the possibility that he'll break bad and start hurting people, but there's no ticking clock scenario, no Dominion ship on the way to pick up its lost soldier, no attempt to artificially induce tension. Once the focus settles on Odo and the kid, that's what the episode is about. That's enough, and the creators of the episode trust it to be enough. Beyond the particular bits that work and don't work for me, I find The Abandoned to be one of those shows that is more interesting to think about and talk about after the fact than it is to watch. Not to say that it's a bad episode. Like I said, despite its flaws and peculiarities, I like it. But its most intriguing questions are the ones it leaves unresolved, or rather, the ones it leaves for us to resolve for ourselves. We can read Odo and the kid's story as a metaphor for deprogramming someone who has left a cult, or counseling someone who exhibits harmful behaviors after years of abusive parenting or being part of a toxic relationship. Taken that way, the episode is a depiction of how incredibly challenging that can be for the deprogrammer and the person being deprogrammed. The kid is someone who, metaphorically speaking, was raised to think of himself a certain way, and other people a certain way, and the world a certain way. Now he's being confronted by Odo, a person he inherently trusts, with all this contradictory information. Actually, the world isn't the way you've been told it is. Actually, you aren't the way you've been told you are. And other people aren't the way you've been told they are either. Everything you think you know, everything you're sure you know, is wrong. But if you work with me and trust me, I can show you the way out. That's basically what Odo is saying to the kid, and it's confusing because everything you think you know is wrong is a lot to absorb, and also because, trust me and I'll show you the way, isn't that how this whole mess started? Again, metaphorically speaking, if we read the Jem'Hadar's genetic engineering as representing the real-world psychological conditioning that occurs in cults and other abusive, controlling environments. The kid is confused and conflicted, and ultimately he chooses to give in to his conditioning and go back to the cult. You can also read the kid's situation as a metaphor for drug addiction and wind up with the same basic message. Odo tries to convince him that there's a life beyond his addiction, that he can choose not to be ruled by that drug that is literally and figuratively, in this case, being pumped into his body right this second. But in the end, it doesn't happen. We're meant to be sad about that. We're meant to view that as a tragedy. Odo tried to show this kid that another life, a life without violence and coercion and exploitation, was possible, but he couldn't do it. Finally, the kid just couldn't make that leap. Here's what I think might be the most important point, though. Odo isn't sorry he tried. At the end, he tells Kira, "You were right about the boy," but he doesn't say it in a way that suggests he wouldn't do it all over again if he had the chance. When people get lost in the way the kid is in this episode, it can be difficult to pull them back to reality. In some cases, it might even be impossible. Not everyone who tries to leave an abusive situation makes it out. Not every addict recovers. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. When it's someone's freedom or health or life that's at stake, the effort to help them might ultimately fail, but it will never be wasted. Take it from Odo, he knows. He's seen the needle and the damage done. The little part of it in everyone, but every Jem'Hadar's a setting sun. Those are my thoughts on The Abandoned. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time as this batch of reviews of episodes about Orphans continues, and we hop over to Star Trek Voyager for a review of a show from its 6th season titled Child's Play. See you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.